Well, good morning. Glad we have the opportunity to gather together in our still digital form to worship together. Wanted to just take a few minutes to prepare our minds for the Lord's Supper, to give us some things to think on, to clear our minds and to see the significance of what we're about to do as we commune with the Lord and commune with one another. In Genesis chapter 18, we have the very first full meal recorded in the Bible. And one of the things that I think we often miss in our readings of the Bible is one of the reasons we've been emphasizing reading through the whole Bible like we have is the interconnectivity of the Bible. The way that the stories of the Bible play off one another and really inform one another from the very first page all the way to the last. And so in Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is going to host a meal, and it's really held up as a pattern of hospitality. And hospitality is one of those traits that we don't really think of in the same way that the ancients did. Hospitality for us is, you make sure that your house is neat before you invite people over to the house. You make sure that you set out the fine china, you set out your nice dishes, so that when people come over to have a meal with you, you treat them the best way. And that's kind of a facet of hospitality, but hospitality in the ancients was much more than that. Hospitality was the willingness to open your home and share a meal with people, which was a big deal because that was the idea of societally accepting someone, of essentially claiming equality with people, was to break bread with them. And so when you would do that with strangers, you were honoring them. And so hospitality was one of the most important traits in the ancient world. One of the worst things that you could ever do was to betray or hurt a guest that you had welcomed into your home. And it was because hospitality was such a central facet of that culture that you showed hospitality to strangers. And so in Genesis chapter 18, we have kind of midway through the story of Abraham, we have him welcoming a group of strangers. In chapter 18 and verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth, and said, 'My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant.' And they said, 'So do as you have said.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, 'Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes.' Abraham also ran to the herd, took a tender and choice calf, gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate." We often look at this as the main focus of the story being that God is promising both to Abraham and to Sarah, reaffirming the promise that they're going to have a child together. And so we tend to kind of skip by this very detailed passage that details Abraham going through a lot of pains to prepare a meal and to open his doors, although it's a tent, so not really a door, but to open his home and open his place as a place of hospitality for these 3 people. Now, we're clued in to know that this is the Lord, but we're not 100% sure if Abraham knows that. He uses the term "my Lord," but it's more of the generic term for Lord. It's more of a sign of respect. So Abraham likely doesn't know who he's hosting. He thinks these are just some normal people, and it will be in the course of the events that he figures out who it is. But Abraham is showing his hospitality. He's showing his generosity of spirit by allowing these strangers that are, journeying through to come into his home, to eat with them, to share a meal, and he's even waiting on them. That's that idea of him standing for them. He's humbling himself and waiting on these people, serving them, washing their feet, and so he's really demonstrating a hospitality. Well, it's interesting then that Abraham, who's kind of held up as this first example of hospitality, we see him then used as an example in Matthew chapter 8 of a much more permanent form of hospitality. In Matthew chapter 8, in a miracle story that we've talked about earlier, I believe last week, we know that the centurion comes to Capernaum and he asks the Lord to come to heal his servant. Jesus starts coming. He says, no, you actually don't have to come to my house. Just say the word. I know you can do that because I understand authority. And Jesus marvels at him. And listen to what Jesus says in verse 10. It says, "Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, Truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Again, we read this often in the focus of the context of the miracle, but it's interesting that Jesus uses Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a symbol of who will be in the heavenly feast, who will gather in the home of God and eat with him. And it's this really cool kind of reversal of this story. And again, it's very much kind of in the fringe of what we're talking about in the main story. But it's interesting that Abraham opened his doors to the Lord. He opened his home to God and his two angels and fed them and clothed them and all these things. And then we see Jesus holding up Abraham as he's going to be kind of the one at the feast. He's going to be the one hosting the feast in heaven with Isaac and Jacob. And it's this cool kind of reversal of Abraham was hospitable to God. And so in the next life, God will be hospitable to Abraham. And that's one of the cool aspects of the Lord's Supper, is that we talk about this being the Lord's Supper. This is God showing hospitality to us. This is God opening his doors to allow us to come in. He's showing us hospitality, that he's coming in here, he's cleansing us, he's washing our feet in a spiritual way, and he's sharing a table with us, a table that he himself has prepared with his body and his blood. And so we often don't think about the meal connotations of this, but this is God sharing a meal with us. And that's not just, in the modern sense of, he's buying a burger for us. It's in that ancient sense of sharing a meal that he has welcomed us into his home. We are under his protection. We are under his provision. And he is claiming basically that we can be with him, that we can be like him, that he is accepting us into his home. And just like Jesus, shared his meals with sinners, and everybody's like, how could you do that? And he's like, these are the people I came to be with. These are the people that I came to let in, is those who have repented of their sins and have become like me. And so as we partake of this meal, this is a foreshadowing of the ultimate fulfillment of that feast that Abraham prepared, that now it will be God who prepares the feast for us. We who were strangers, we who were sojourners, he welcomes us into his home, into a feast that will never end, a time where we will never have to go wander again, but we have come home for the final feast with the Lord, where we will break bread and we will share the cup with him. No longer the cup and the bread of sacrifice, but instead the bread and the cup of family, the bread and the cup of being home with him. And that's what we look forward to as we partake of this meal. We look forward to that final fulfillment where we will eat and drink and we will be merry and we will live with God forevermore. I hope these things help you. Let's keep these things in mind as we now partake of the Lord's Supper.